Have you ever left a room feeling smaller than when you entered? Not because you were quiet, but because you spoke too much. You argued every point, clarified every detail, laid out your truth piece by piece, and yet something felt wrong. Not in your words, but in your energy. Like the more you tried to be heard, the less anyone truly listened. Like every sentence pulled you further from yourself. This is the hidden cost of reaction. We've been trained to believe that silence is surrender, that speaking is strength, that not defending ourselves is a kind of social suicide. But what if this belief system is broken? What if speaking, in the wrong context, is not a weapon, but a leak? The truth is, most conversations aren't about truth. They're about control, about ego, about whose narrative dominates the room. And the more you feel you must speak, the more you've already handed over your power. Because the moment your inner calm depends on their understanding, you're no longer free, you're negotiating for peace. Power doesn't rush, it doesn't explain, it doesn't beg to be seen. True authority doesn't argue, it decides. And so the real question is not, how can I win this conversation? It's, why am I still trying? Why do we feel this relentless urge to explain ourselves? Why do we clarify our intentions, soften our tone, over-explain our silence? Because somewhere deep inside, we've internalized a dangerous lie, that justification equals safety, that if people understand us, they won't misjudge us, that if we speak enough, we'll be allowed to exist without conflict. But here's what most never realize. Justification is often submission disguised as clarity. The moment you feel obligated to defend your every decision, your every no, your every boundary, you've already conceded the space. You've already centered the other person's comfort above your own truth. In a world obsessed with being agreeable, many of us have confused kindness with compliance. We apologize for having standards. We explain why we need space. We validate the other person's misunderstanding, instead of standing firm in our own clarity. And in doing so, we send an unspoken message. My truth only stands if you agree with it. But real strength doesn't need permission, it doesn't need applause, and it definitely doesn't need to be explained. Because silence, when grounded in inner knowing, doesn't signal weakness, it signals sovereignty. It says, I'm not here to win you over, I'm here to honor myself. Step into any heated conversation and listen, not to what is being said, but why it's being said. You'll start to notice a pattern. Behind the logic, behind the passion, behind the words, there's something else pulling the strings. The ego. The ego doesn't want truth, it wants control. It doesn't care if it's right, it just doesn't want to feel wrong. It interprets disagreement as threat, silence as judgment, stillness as superiority. And so it does what all fragile things do. It makes noise. Loud, persistent noise. You've seen this before. People who dominate rooms with volume, who interrupt to feel important, who mock what they don't understand. They don't do this because they are powerful. They do it because deep down they are afraid. Afraid of being exposed, afraid of feeling small, afraid that if the talking stops, the truth will rise to the surface, and they won't be ready to meet it. That's why silence terrifies the ego, because silence is not a void, it's a mirror, and most people cannot bear to see what is reflected. when there is nothing left to distract them. But here's where the game begins to shift. When you stop reacting, you begin observing. When you stop playing defense, you start noticing the architecture of other people's insecurity, the ones who need to win, the ones who crave attention, the ones who fear your quiet more than your anger. And in that moment, you step out of the emotional economy. You no longer barter your energy for understanding. You no longer plead for validation. You realize that your presence, held in silence, is more disruptive than any well-rehearsed rebuttal, because the ego speaks to win, but power listens in order to see. Silence isn't passive, it's pressure, not the kind that pushes externally, but the kind that exposes, the kind that turns the emotional temperature up without ever raising a voice. Silence disturbs the performative mind, because it removes the script, it removes the cues, it removes the game. When you choose not to respond, especially when someone is trying to provoke, you introduce uncertainty into their psyche. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know how you feel. They don't know where they stand. And because most people rely on predictability to feel safe, that ambiguity destabilizes them. Suddenly they begin second-guessing themselves. Was I too harsh? Did they see through me? Why didn't they fight back? That's the unseen power of your silence. While they scramble to interpret your non-response, they start revealing more than they ever intended. Their defensiveness flares. Their need for validation spikes. They speak faster, louder, clumsier, trying to fill the void you've left, but you've left it on purpose, because that void is not absence. This is why silence is feared by those who manipulate. They need your reaction to complete the loop. They depend on your energy to validate their control. Take that away, and their strategy collapses. You don't have to confront them. You don't have to explain why you see through them. All you have to do is nothing. And nothing, when intentional, is not emptiness, it is total authority. There is a sacred discipline in not responding, a kind of internal training that sharpens you not in violence, but in precision. In a world obsessed with oversharing, over-talking, over-explaining, the act of withholding becomes revolutionary. But withholding is not about suppression. It's not about bottling up what you feel or hiding what's true. It's about discernment, about choosing what deserves your energy and what doesn't, about understanding that every time you offer your attention, you're placing your power on the table, and not every table is worthy. The world will tell you to speak, it will tell you to defend, to clarify, to make your side known. But why? Often because it wants your vulnerability. Because when you speak too soon, too freely, too emotionally, you reveal your structure. You become easy to read, easy to map, easy to manipulate. But when you withhold, you preserve your mystery. And mystery is magnetic. Mystery makes people curious. It makes them pause. It makes them second-guess their assumptions about you. They don't know what you'll say. They don't know if you'll say anything. And in that space of uncertainty, you gain control without ever needing to assert it. You are no longer reactive. You are selective. And the one who chooses when and how to engage is the one who silently leads the room. So, ask yourself before you speak, does this deserve a response? Or does it deserve my stillness? Because every word you don't say becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, others are forced to face themselves. There's a moment, subtle but seismic, when someone who once relied on your reactions realizes they can no longer get to you. They speak the usual bait, they press the same buttons, they wait for the same emotional script to play out. But this time, nothing happens. No outrage, no defense, no need to explain, just silence, calm presence. And in that moment, their structure breaks. Because their control over you was never physical, it was emotional. It lived in your reactivity. It lived in the way your nervous system rushed to accommodate their discomfort, in the way your voice cracked from needing to be heard, in the way you shrank yourself to keep the peace. But when that version of you doesn't show up anymore, the spell is broken. The manipulator loses their rhythm. They become disoriented, unsure of where their power went, because what they feared all along wasn't your anger, it was your composure. They feared the version of you that could hold your fire, that could see clearly, that could choose not to participate in their story. And that's the kind of power that cannot be faked. Because silence, when it comes from healing, not fear, is a boundary made of steel, not cold, not cruel, but unavailable to chaos. You no longer explain your value, you embody it. You no longer plead for peace, you protect it. And those who once depended on your instability to control the narrative, they're left alone with the echo of their own manipulation. There is a particular kind of silence that doesn't feel like withdrawal, it feels like truth. Not the kind that begs to be acknowledged, but the kind that alters the atmosphere just by existing. You've likely experienced it, the absence of your reply in a group chat, the unreturned call, the unread message, not out of pettiness, not out of spite, but because you finally chose to honor your bandwidth. Suddenly people notice. They ask, "Are you okay?" They wonder, "Did I do something wrong?" They feel the shift, because the energy they once had free access to now requires presence, effort, integrity to receive again. This is not about making them chase you. It's about no longer offering yourself to people who don't listen unless something is missing. Your absence is not revenge, it's revelation. It reveals who values you only when you're gone. It exposes who confused your kindness with obligation. It filters out the ones who never asked how you felt, only how quickly you could respond. When you become less accessible, you don't lose connection, you lose exploitation, you lose emotional freeloaders, you lose the performance of being everything for everyone. And in that loss, you gain something immeasurable, yourself. Detachment has been misunderstood. People think it means apathy, distance, coldness. They assume that if you care, you must react, that love must come with urgency, that truth must come with explanation, that power must come with performance. But detachment, the real kind, is none of these things. It is clarity without chaos. It is connection without permission seeking. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling, it means you stop leaking. You stop handing over your peace in exchange for temporary understanding. You stop bending your boundaries so others feel more comfortable. You begin to realize that not everything requires a response, that not every conflict is an invitation worth accepting, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing, and mean it. Because emotional discipline is not about suppressing truth, it's about refining its delivery. It's the ability to witness your trigger and not become it, to sit with your anger and not weaponize it, to feel the edge of your old wound rise and still choose alignment over reaction. That's not detachment, that's mastery. And the more you practice it, the more your nervous system stops mistaking reactivity for aliveness. You no longer need the emotional spikes to feel like you're in control. You don't need the argument to validate your intelligence. You don't need the fight to prove your strength. You just are, grounded, intentional, whole. And from that place, your silence becomes language. In a world obsessed with interpretation, where people try to decode your tone, your pauses, your timing, being unreadable is a superpower, not because you're hiding, but because you've stopped offering yourself as a character in their story. You don't give away your reactions. You don't rush to explain your boundaries. You don't serve your emotions on a plate for someone else to dissect. You become untouchable, not because you're distant, but because your self-worth is no longer on the table. When someone can predict you, they can control you. If they know how you'll respond, they can design the situation to trigger that exact reaction. That's how manipulation works, through emotional predictability, through scripts you didn't write but keep acting out. But when you become unreadable, they lose the script. They hesitate. They tread lightly. They wonder who you've become. And the truth is, you haven't changed. You've just stopped performing. You've stopped playing the expected role. You've stopped translating your soul into terms someone else can digest. This isn't cruelty, this is liberation. When you no longer fear being misunderstood, you finally begin to be real. And the people who can meet you there, without needing you to shrink, explain, or soften, those are the ones who see you, not just use you. Because the goal is no longer to be understood by everyone, it's to be at peace with yourself. There is a moment, quiet, unannounced, when you stop chasing approval and begin reclaiming your presence, not with fanfare, not with rebellion, but with a breath, a stillness, a refusal to abandon yourself one more time for someone else's comfort. You've spent years editing your truth. You've rewritten your boundaries in softer fonts. You've apologized for your tone instead of honoring your message. You've shrunk in rooms that couldn't hold your fullness. But something shifted. Maybe it was the fatigue. Maybe it was the silence that no longer felt heavy, but holy. Maybe it was the realization that being liked was costing you your life, because that's what it does. This slow erosion of authenticity. It steals your peace in exchange for approval. It teaches you that belonging must be earned, that safety lives in how agreeable, how polite, how emotionally available you are, but you're done paying that price. Now you see that not all love is love, that some connections were just contracts to stay small, that some admiration was just applause for your compliance. And now you choose something else. You choose not reacting as a sacred act. You choose silence not as submission, but as a strategic clarity. You choose presence not as performance, but as truth. Because who you are, at your core, is not someone who needs to prove, please, or pursue. You are the one who watches without collapsing, who speaks only when it serves, who walks away without theatrics, who listens more than you explain, who no longer performs peace. You live it. You've remembered something that society tries hard to make you forget. Stillness is not absence. Stillness is sovereignty. And now, your silence doesn't mean you're afraid. It means you've already won.